How do you keep track of all the random tiny things you learn every single day?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Right. Because think about the friction of just daily problem solving. Like you figure out a really complex keyboard shortcut to automate a task, or you finally isolate the exact nutrient deficiency that's making your houseplant drop its leaves.
Yeah, the classic yellowing leaves.
Exactly. But do you actually log that? Do you commit it to some kind of centralized system? Or does that micro insight just, evaporate into the ether the second you close the browser tab?
I mean, let's be honest, most of us let it evaporate.
Total.
We treat daily learning as this transient state. We solve the immediate bottleneck, we close the ticket, and then we just assume we'll, I don't know, reconstruct the solution from scratch the next time we hit the same problem.
Which never works out.
No, it inevitably leads to solving the exact same problem 3 months later. And you're just sitting there wondering why it feels so frustratingly familiar.
Well, today we are diving into a source from someone who absolutely refuses to let those moments evaporate. We're doing a deep dive into a blog post that was published today, actually March 21st, 2026, by Kian Meng Ang.
Yeah, a really fascinating read.
It is. The title is Notes on Haskell Programming, Part 88, Why We're Dropping Void in Our Parsers. And just to be clear, our mission today isn't to walk away as Haskell syntax experts.
Right, you don't need to know Haskell to get value out of this.
Exactly. We are using this highly specific entry to kind of decode the mindset of a self-described old software plumber. We want to look at how obsessively documenting microscopic details can build this absolute juggernaut of a personal knowledge system.
So, okay, let's unpack this, starting right at the code level with this parser refactor.
Yeah, so Ang is really deep in the weeds here with a tool called megaparsec.
Okay.
And as he's building out these parsers, he hits this moment of, well, architectural friction. It's about how he handles intermediate steps.
Because in parser combinators, you're doing a lot of things where the side effect matters.
Right.
Exactly, like consuming whitespace or matching a specific string token, but the actual return value of that step is completely irrelevant to the final abstract syntax tree you're trying to build.
Right. You just need the job done. You don't need a receipt for every tiny step. Or rather, he was getting these receipts he didn't want. He was originally using void for those steps, right?
Yeah, he'd wrap the action in void to explicitly tell the system, hey, discard this useless return value.
But then he realizes this is creating just a massive amount of syntactic noise across his whole code base. Like every single time he wants to drop a return value, he has to clutter up the visual layout of his parser with the word void.
It gets really messy.
Yeah. So he refactors, he drops void entirely, and simply ends the block with pure and then empty parentheses.
Which is mathematically elegant, honestly.
How so?
Well, by utilizing pure with those empty parentheses, which represents a unit, he's isolating the consumed text and ensuring the second element of his match tuple resolves cleanly to that unit. The output example he gives in the post demonstrates it perfectly. When he runs the match, the tuple returns a string of Chinese characters representing the consumed text and then just the unit. So it looks like a parenthesis, quote, chapter 8, preface in Chinese, end quote, comma, and then the empty parentheses for the unit.
That makes sense. I was actually trying to visualize the structural difference between these two approaches earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, think about unpacking groceries.
Okay, I'm with you.
The void approach is like bringing all your groceries inside, but setting up this highly specialized, expensive incinerator bin in your kitchen whose sole function is to destroy the empty plastic bags you don't care about.
You're spending energy to actively destroy something.
Exactly. But the pure unit approach is fundamentally different. It's like you just stop bringing the empty bags inside in the first place. You only keep the groceries, which is the consumed text, and you just get a simple, weightless checkmark that the job is done. That checkmark is the unit. You stop managing the garbage by simply refusing to ingest the garbage.
I like that. That reframing captures the underlying philosophy perfectly. It's this shift from active destruction to passive filtering. You preserve the structure of the return type without, polluting the data stream with irrelevant variables.
But okay, here is my pushback.
Let's hear it.
I understand the elegance of the architectural shift, but we are talking about swapping one function for another in a highly specific parser block.
True.
Why write a whole public journal entry about removing one single redundant word from your code? I mean, it feels like the definition of microscopic triviality.
Yeah.
If every developer blogged about every single function swap, the internet would just be completely unnavigable.
Well, that assumes the purpose of the blog post is audience consumption.
Right.
If you view this through the lens of, audience building or content marketing, then yeah, sure, it's trivial. But this isn't content. It's externalized state management.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Think about the cognitive overhead required to maintain a mental catalog of every single syntax optimization you've ever discovered.
Across multiple languages, too.
Exactly. By forcing himself to articulate this megaparsec trick in a structured post, Aang is offloading that specific node of logic from his working memory. He's putting it into a permanent, searchable database.
So he's lowering his own future activation energy.
Precisely.
Like 6 months from now, when he's writing another parser and he feels that vague sense of, didn't I find a cleaner way to do this? He doesn't have to wade through Stack Overflow. He just queries his own index.
Right. What's fascinating here is that by making it public, rather than keeping it in some private Obsidian vault or a Notion workspace, he's quietly indexing this solution for global search engines.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's this act of digital decluttering that accidentally functions as microphilanthropy for other developers who might be stuck on the exact same megaparsec tuple issue.
That's a great point. And let's actually zoom out to the sheer scale of that externalized memory, because this is not an isolated brain dump.
Not at all.
The title alone gives it away. Notes on Haskell Programming, Part 88.
Part 88, just for one language.
Yeah. And when you look at the sidebar of this site, the archiving system is staggering. Today is only March 21st, 2026, and according to the site's own index, he has already published 63 posts this month.
That pace requires a deeply, deeply ingrained operational cadence.
It really does.
A post volume of that magnitude suggests his writing process is virtually frictionless. He's not agonizing over SEO optimization or, crafting the perfect hook or finding a royalty-free header image.
Right. He's just taking raw operational insights and committing them directly to the public record.
That's part of his actual workflow, not as an afterthought.
And the historical consistency proves that. I actually dug into the yearly archives listed in the source.
What did you find?
Okay, so in 2024, he published 732 posts.
Wow.
In 2025, 730 posts. That is literally 2 discrete, documented microlearnings every single day without fail for years. And the archive tracks all the way back to July 2011.
That's a 15-year unbroken chain.
Exactly. A systematic documentation machine.
When you maintain that level of consistency for a decade and a half, you fundamentally alter how you interact with information.
How so?
Well, in the broader field of knowledge management, the primary bottleneck is usually the barrier between doing the work and recording the work.
Oh yeah, the friction of opening the notebook.
Right. But Aang has collapsed that barrier. For him, the documentation is the work. And by meticulously recording the micro details, like the syntax of a parser tuple, he frees up his higher-level cognitive functions to tackle macro architecture.
Because you can't design complex distributed systems if your mind is bogged down trying to remember whether you should use void or pure.
Exactly.
And that actually makes me wonder about the breadth of his architecture. Because think about it. If you are committing 2 pieces of knowledge to an external system every single day, you cannot sustain that by writing exclusively about Haskell.
No, you'd run out of material eventually.
Right. And the site's sidebar proves he doesn't just stick to code. Here's where it gets really interesting. He is documenting a wild variety of subjects. He has a series called Notes on Gardening that is currently up to Part 842.
Part 842.
Yeah. He's logging hyper-specific variables about propagating bougainvillea, identifying what he calls leggy seedlings, and tracking the cultivation of common mustard.
The documentation expands aggressively into biological systems.
It really does.
His notes on fish keeping sits at Part 213. And he's not just taking pictures of a fish tank, right?
No.
He is maintaining rigorous beta spawn logs, documenting aggression mitigation tactics, and, this is wild, logging the variables required to simulate a monsoon environment in a closed aquatic system.
Simulating a monsoon for his fish. And he also maintains deep multi-part logs on Erlang and Elixir networking architecture, specifically testing MediaTek against Wi-Fi 7 standards.
He covers typesetting, artificial intelligence, photography, meditation.
Oh, and there's even a Notes on Dieting series, where he's analyzing the physiological impact of eating fish and isolating specific nutritional compounds like Icosa something. The index kind of trails off, but the level of granular analysis is so obvious.
It's the hallmark of a genuine polymath. What we're observing is a person who treats the entire physical and digital world as a series of interlocking systems just waiting to be debugged, optimized, and documented.
Let me play devil's advocate here, though,
Okay.
because this directly contradicts almost all modern advice on professional development and intellectual focus.
That's true. It really does.
The prevailing wisdom right now is that we live in an attention economy, and the only way to survive is to niche down. You have to find your specific vertical, eliminate context switching, and become the absolute master of one domain.
The hyper-specialist route.
Exactly. Doesn't spending your morning analyzing the gelatinous pear in a garden and your afternoon simulating monsoons for betta fish, and then your evening writing Go and Rust parsers create a massive dilution of expertise? Doesn't it just completely scatter your focus?
Well, that niche down advice assumes the goal of learning is personal branding or market positioning.
Okay.
If your goal is to be known as the Haskell guy on Twitter, then yeah, propagating Bougainvillea is a distraction. But if your goal is deep structural comprehension of complex systems, then intense context switching is actually a superpower.
Really? A superpower?
Yeah, because you have to look at the methodology, not just the subject matter.
So you're saying the underlying mechanism of his analysis remains the same regardless of what he's looking at?
Precisely. Let's look at that monsoon simulation for the fish tank.
Right.
To simulate a monsoon, to trigger a spawning event, you cannot just pour water into a glass box. You have to manipulate an array of environmental state variables: barometric pressure, water temperature gradients, flow rates, dietary inputs.
It's incredibly complex.
And you have to monitor the state changes in the fish and adjust the inputs accordingly to prevent a systemic collapse.
Which is exactly what you do when building a parser in functional programming. You manage state variables, you handle inputs without mutating the underlying data structures, and you watch out for edge cases that could cause the system to fail.
Yeah.
He's literally applying functional programming paradigms to an aquatic ecosystem.
It is pure systems thinking. A garden is just a biological state machine. A network protocol is a digital state machine.
Wow.
By forcing his brain to recognize the same underlying patterns of causality and feedback loops across wildly different domains, he exercises an analytical muscle that a hyper-specialist might just let atrophy.
That makes a lot of sense.
Furthermore, this extreme cross-pollination acts as an incredible prophylactic against burnout.
Because when he hits an intractable bug in a Haskell compiler, he doesn't just bash his head against the keyboard for another 6 hours.
Right.
He walks away and applies that exact same analytical rigor to debugging why a seedling is turning yellow. He keeps the processor running, but he just feeds it a totally different data set.
And very often, the solution to the digital bug presents itself while he's analyzing the biological system.
Oh, totally.
The structure of a root system might suddenly provide a mental model for a more efficient way to route data through a Wi-Fi 7 network. Innovation rarely happens in a silo, you know. It happens at the intersection of disparate disciplines.
That brings up a critical question, actually, about the worldview driving this entire operation.
Yeah.
Because we see what he writes and the astonishing volume of his output, but the structural philosophy built into the margins of his website reveals the ethos of this software plumber.
Yeah, the sidebar is very telling.
It is. There's a dedicated do support section in his sidebar where he explicitly lists the organizations he financially or philosophically backs.
And the list is highly curated. The Electronic Frontier Foundation,
Sure.
the Free Software Foundation, the Software Freedom Conservancy, the Tor Project, and Wikipedia.
That is a very specific, uncompromising alignment. And alongside that, he has a prominent disclaimer that basically states, opinions expressed here are my own. All content is for informational purposes only. I cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of this information, and I accept zero liability for any loss or damage incurred by using it.
A classic disclaimer.
But think about it. In an era where every tech blog feels like it's selling a masterclass or trying to be this definitive, peer-reviewed authority, this disclaimer feels almost radically casual. He's effectively saying, look, here are my notes. If you break your production environment using my megaparsec trick, that is your problem. So what does this all mean?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that disclaimer combined with his supported organizations is the absolute distillation of the fluff-less ethos.
Right, free Libre and open source software.
Exactly. Aang doesn't just use these tools, he's actively involved. He maintains projects like the Perl module of the WET and contributes to Perl Weekly challenges.
Oh.
The full-sys philosophy fundamentally rejects the idea that knowledge should be siloed or monetized or hidden behind a sheen of corporate perfection. It is about the messy, iterative, highly public construction of a global commons.
So the idea is that code doesn't have to be flawless to be valuable. A half-finished workaround or just a tiny refactor has utility, provided it's shared openly.
Yeah. In a proprietary software environment, perfection is the baseline expectation because liability is attached to the product. But in the open source world, the goal is to lower the barrier to contribution. When Ang drops that pure trick onto his blog, he isn't publishing a peer-reviewed academic paper.
He's throwing a small, useful tool onto a public workbench.
Exactly.
And the lack of liability is the exact mechanism that enables his massive volume. Think about it. If he had to rigorously QA every single line of code he posted, or guarantee that his common mustard propagation technique worked in every climate zone on Earth, the friction of publishing would skyrocket.
Oh, absolutely.
He'd go from writing 730 posts a year to maybe a dozen. By explicitly rejecting authority and liability, he creates an environment of frictionless public iteration.
It's the ultimate counterculture to the polished, sanitized tech influencer ecosystem we see today. He is keeping that view source culture of the early internet alive. He's inviting you to look at the raw, unpolished scaffolding of his daily work, not just the glossy final product.
Which shifts the entire perspective for those of us navigating our own information overload. You don't need to know the syntax of Haskell. You don't need to dedicate your weekend to logging the spawning habits of a bed of fish.
Probably shouldn't, unless you're really into it.
Right. But Ang's approach is a masterclass in the power of unapologetic, process-oriented documentation. The takeaway here is to stop waiting for the grand, polished final result before you write something down. Treat your daily frictions as valuable data.
Yes, document the boring details.
When you figure out a workaround in Excel, or dial in the exact extraction time for your morning espresso, document the microvariables. Offload those tiny nodes of logic from your working memory into an external system so your brain can actually focus on the macro architecture of your life.
And to punctuate that mindset of perpetual iteration, look at the very last line of his post about the Haskell parser.
Oh, right.
He spends the entire entry meticulously detailing why pure is the optimal solution for dropping the void, and then he signs off with this exact sentence. In our next post, we'll discuss a different approach of rewriting the parser codes.
I love that. He builds the elegant solution, and before the ink is even dry, he's already planning to tear it down and rewrite it tomorrow. The system is just never finished.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating proposition to consider. The modern internet heavily incentivizes hiding our process.
Definitely.
We are trained to only publish the successes, the final drafts, the optimized routines. But Ang's 15-year archive proves that the real value lies in the messy, unfiltered documentation of the journey. So if you were forced to open source your personal daily process, if you had to publish a raw, unedited changelog of the half-finished workarounds and microfixes you used to get through your day-to-day, what unexpected value might someone else find in your garbage code? What seemingly finished system or routine in your own life is actually just waiting for its next great iteration?